Chapter 13. El Filibusterismo. Context and Content. Rizal's second novel, El Filibusterismo, is a story set in twilight years of the Spanish colonial government in the Philippines. It was first translated in English by Charles Derbyshire in 1912 under the title The Reign of Greed. The book, according to the translator, represents Rizal's more mature judgment on political and social conditions in the islands, and in its graver and less hopeful tone reflects the disappointment and discouragement which he had encountered in his efforts to lead the way to reform. At the end of this chapter, the students should be able to: number 1, trace the meaning of the term filibustero across time. Number 2, explain the historical context in which El Filibusterismo was written. Number 3, examine current events through the eyes and characters. And lastly, evaluate results as a novelist. Vocabulary. Filibustero. It is a 19th century context. It is translated as subversive, a patriot who was usually associated with revolutionary activities. Guardia Civil. It means police or a military force assigned by the colonial government to maintain peace and order. Cabeza de Barangay. Head of the barangay.
Filibustero History and Context. Rizal started writing El Filibusterismo as a sequel to the No Limitangere after he returned to Europe on February 1888. So therefore, the novel was written in the midst of straits and oppressions he and his family were experiencing. It is because of the Noli and the Calamba incident. So Rizal continued working on his novel and made some revisions. While he was in London in 1888, he was able to complete the novel after 3 years when he was in Biarritz, France on March 29, 1891. However, because of financial constraints, it was not until September of the same year that the book was published with the help of his friend Valentin Vinton. In March 1887, after reading the Noli Me Tangere, Blumentritt asked Rizal the meaning of the word filibustero, which he did not find in the Spanish language. To recall, Rizal replied, "The word filibustero is still very little known in the Philippines. The common people as yet do not know it. I heard it for the first time in 1872, when the tragic executions took place. I still remember the terror it aroused. Our father forbade us ever to utter it, as well as the words Cavite, Burgos. The Manila newspapers and the Spaniards apply this word to one whom they want to render suspect of revolutionary activities. The educated fear the reach of the word. It does not have the meaning of revolter. It rather means a dangerous patriot who will soon be hung, or a presumptuous fellow." In 1890, Wenceslao Retana wrote about the filibustero and described the term as the one who, eager for the independence of the country, resorts to various extralegal proceedings in order to reach the objective that he pursued. So by the end of the 19th century, the Spanish colonial government defined filibuster as someone who works for the separation of our overseas provinces. With these definitions, one will have an idea about the plot of Rizal's second novel. It deals with subversion. It pictures the lives of people under an oppressive regime. It narrates the struggles of every Filipino in fighting for independence. El Fili is dedicated to Gomborza, the three priests who were accused of being filibusters in 1872. In his dedication, Rizal expressed his high regard for the priests who became victims of the evil that I am trying to fight. To the memory of priest Don Mariano Gomez, 85 years old, Don Jose Burgos, 30 years old, and Don Jacinto Zamora, 35 years old, executed on the scaffold of Bagumbayan on February 28, 1872. The Church, in refusing to degrade you, has placed in doubt the crime imputed to you. The government, in shrouding your cause with mystery and obscurities, creates belief in some error committed in critical moments, and the whole Philippines, in venerating your memory and calling you martyrs, in no way acknowledges your guilt. As long, therefore, as your participation in the Cavite uprising is not clearly shown, whether or not you were patriots, whether or not you nourish sentiments of justice and liberty, I have the right to dedicate my work to you, as to victims of the evil that I am trying to fight. And while we wait for Spain to reinstate you and make herself jointly culpable for your death, let these pages serve as belated wreath of dried leaves laid on your unknown graves, and may your blood be upon the hands of those who, without sufficient proof, assail your memory. However, Rizal made mistakes in indicating the age of the three priests and the date they were executed. The Gomborza were publicly executed by Garrote on the early morning of February 17, 1872. Gomez was then 73, Burgos was 35, and Zamora was 37. In her translation of the novel, Soledad Lacson-Luxin described the book based on the themes that can be seen in the story. El Philip begins where the Nolly leaves off, where love, romance, heroism, idealism, and tragedy turn to hate, bitterness, anger, disillusionment, and vengeance. Unlike Nolly, El Philip burns with passion and ideology. Rizal's biographers open that El Feli showed his maturity as a novelist.
Now, I'll be telling you the synopsis of El Filibusterismo. The story of El Filibusterismo revolved around the main character Simon, who was a rich jeweler. Simon was actually Crisostomo Ibarra of Nolimi, whom everyone thought was killed by Guardia Civil at the Laguna de Bay 13 years ago. He was able to escape and fled to Cuba. He became wealthy and was able to establish connections with prominent Spanish officials. Upon his return to the Philippines, Simon became very influential, being the consultant of Governor General. Simon came back with his grand plan to exact revenge on Spanish officials and to rescue Maria Clara, who entered the convent after learning the news of Ibarra's death. He planned to launch a revolution which he started by smuggling arms and recruiting followers, mainly from the exploited and abused natives. One of his recruits was Basilio, the son of Sisa. With the help of Capitan Tiago, Basilio was able to study medicine in Manila. Simon also began to establish an alliance with Cabezang Tales and his revolutionary group. Cabezang Tales was a former cabeza de barangay who was maltreated by friars. Using his position, Simon encouraged corruption and more oppressive government policies to enrage the people and thus provoke them to revolt. Simon's plans of revolution failed twice. In his first attempt, he decided not to give the signal for the outbreak of the uprising upon hearing the news of Maria Clara's death. Basilio and other students were then arrested for allegedly forming a seditious organization. Simon arranged the release of Basilio, who became bitter and vengeful. However, He was very grateful to Simon and offered his full support for the revolution. The second attempt at starting a revolution entailed the planting of a bomb at the wedding reception of Paulita Gomez and Juanito Palaez, illustrious guests at the mansion, formerly the house of Capitan Tiago, included Padre Salvi and the Governor General. In Simon's plan, the revolution would be triggered by his gifts to the couple, a kerosene lamp with an explosive. When the lamp starts flickering and someone turns the wick, there would be an explosion, signaling the revolutionaries to attack all government buildings in Manila. As planned, Simon gave the lamp during the reception. Before leaving the venue, he left a note with a message: "You will die tonight." Signed by Crisostomo Ibarra. Meanwhile, when Basilio saw all the people at the venue, his conscience bothered him. He saw his friend Isagani, who was recently watching his love Paulita celebrating her wedding. Basilio told Isagani about the explosive and asked him to leave the place. When Padre Salvi confirmed Ibarra's handwriting, the guests began to panic. The lamp flickered and Padre Erin tried to turn the wick, but Isagani, wanting to save Paulita, ran into the house, grabbed the lamp, and threw it into the river, where it exploded. Refugee in the house of a kind Filipino priest, Padre Florentino. The Guardia Civiles, however, learned about the whereabouts about the fugitive and informed the priest that they would come in the evening and to arrest Simon. Instead of surrendering to the authorities, Simon poisoned himself. As the poison started to take effect on his body, he confessed to Padre Florentino his true identity and his plans for revenge. The long and tedious confession, the priest told Simon that his plans might have failed because of the unjust means that were used. He assured Simon that there was still hope for the freedom of the country. The story ended with Padre Florentino throwing Simon's jewels into the sea so that they would not be used by the greedy. He also prayed that, when the right time comes, the treasure would be recovered and used for a noble purpose. That's all. Thank you for listening.